Hi, my name's Phil. I like to talk about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss Trump's latest attempt to resurrect his already failed Liberation Day tariffs idea, as he suggests dozens of countries will see their already blanket 10% tariffs rise to 15 to 20%, but that Canada can look forward to 35% tariffs from August the 1st. I wonder if that includes the vital supplies of oil that the USA imports from Canada, because I'm not sure that the MAGA faithful are going to really think too kindly of that. But first, for daily news and politics, please click the subscribe button to stay notified. So the next chapter of TACO has begun in typically chaotic fashion. When it comes to Trump's trade war with the entire world, I could probably break countries down into like 5 categories. There are the countries such as Australia and the UK, where even Trump accepts that the USA has a trade surplus, but we get the 10% tariffs anyway because he wants to cover the costs of his income tax cuts. Then there are countries where Trump's crayon maths thinks the US has a trade deficit, and he has written to them with the tariffs he intends to apply from August the 1st. Next, there are the countries which are run by Putin-aligned dictators, such as Russia itself, of course, but also including Iran and North Korea. They don't get tariffs at all. And if you're thinking that there's not much trade to tariff, well, there's a damn sight more than Penguin Island, and they still got tariffs. Then there's China, which is a special case where Trump is trying to deal with them without having his trousers pulled down all the time. Then finally, there are the countries where Trump reckons the US has a trade deficit with, but where he hasn't sent them letters for new tariffs. Now, do they get away with the new tariffs then? Are they forgotten about? No, Trump said yesterday that they can expect tariffs to go up from 10% to somewhere between 15 and 20%. Presumably it's been left as a surprise for them because they're not getting letters. Now, you could imagine a possible 6th category of country, which is one which Trump thinks has a trade surplus with the USA, but has arranged a special trade deal. But as this currently only includes Vietnam, and their new trade deal seems to be way worse than for the other Asian countries who haven't agreed anything, I'm not sure I'm ready to acknowledge that category just yet. But the 2 countries which seem to be most in Trump's sights, at least right at this minute, are Brazil, because the orange one doesn't like the idea of a far-right insurrectionist being prosecuted, and Canada, where Trump has threatened 35% tariffs for August the 1st. Trump has further threatened an escalation if Canada retaliates. Tricky for Carney. He ran on a campaign of standing up to Trump, but has tried to be constructive in talks. He'd even been prepared to be flexible with the digital services tax, so it's not clear exactly what Trump wasn't happy about. His letter to Canada talked about dairy and fentanyl, but these are spurious issues really in the grand scheme of things. Be interesting to see how Carney responds. On the one hand, these tariffs would be incredibly damaging for Canada, as the drop in the Canadian dollar with the news shows. On the other, they're also very bad for Trump in terms of his relationship with ordinary struggling Americans. The reason why Trump thinks the trade relationship is in Canada's favour, which it's not really, is because the USA consumes epic levels of Canadian oil. Trump can always try doing without those imports if he wants to balance that trade more in his favour, but the USA depends upon it. In fact, so dependent is the USA on this oil that if Trump really does go ahead with these 35% tariffs, it's hard to imagine he'll actually apply them to the oil imports. I'm going to guess there'll be a few carve-outs. And this is the difficulty for Canada. Trump is whining because of a trade balance which cannot be solved without the USA just not buying that oil. But Trump isn't going to block the imports of that oil or even, I suspect, hamper it. Perhaps Trump just smells blood because Carney backed down on the digital services tax and he thinks he can get much more. It's maybe a sign that maybe you shouldn't do anything which could be perceived as weakness with Trump. You know, like the typical blackmailer will just keep coming back for more. It's incredibly unlikely that Trump will go ahead with the tariffs for any length of time, not just on past behaviour, but if he doesn't back down before August the 1st or announce a pause, which is increasingly his way of backing down without looking like he's backing down. It's like, it's Schrodinger's tariffs, isn't it, with Trump? He announces tariffs. Oh, these tariffs are in place. Oh, but I'm going to announce a pause so we have time for negotiations. So then the tariffs are in place, but also not in place at the same time. But he won't be able to persist with them for long. A recession is the last thing Trump wants, but it's not just about the tariffs on Canadian imports. Trump claims to be ramping up tariffs on dozens of countries around the world. and the 10% baseline ones take their toll as well, the USA may well be able to take the hit if it were targeting like one major market at a time or a group of smaller ones. But it's doing it all at once. Over 11% of US imports come from Canada, mostly in the form of things the USA cannot really do without. 35% tariffs would be challenging for parts of the US economy and politically very awkward when the price of gas goes up. But although we talk about Trump threatening 35% tariffs on like 11% worth of their imports, he still applied 10% tariffs on 100% of all their imports. Well, almost 100%, not Russia and so on. And he's threatening to increase that substantially. You know, I just don't see how Trump and his advisors think they can manage the US economy if they suddenly whack up tariffs across the board next month. And of course, this makes it all the less likely that Trump's going to get his interest rate cuts. So unless Trump's planning on backing down and he's just trying to browbeat some countries into agreeing some unwise concessions over the next few months, like he got away with Vietnam, you know, living in a country, I have to say, living in a country which also raised trade barriers against our most important trading partners, you know, with Brexit, I have to say, this is how it goes, everyone. This is how it goes. What happens is other countries adopt trade policies which prioritise leaving you out of their supply chains because you're no longer reliable. No matter what agreements Trump gets in the next few weeks and months, other countries are going to see the USA as a hostile, unreliable trading partner and looking to diversify away from it in order to secure long-term stability for their own businesses. No responsible government can allow their own businesses to be constantly under the sword of Damocles like this. They may in the short term agree to something because they're under the cosh, right? Trump can absolutely bully some countries, a lot of countries. But in their long-term trade policy, they're going to try and remove America's power to do this to them in the future. No matter what agreement is reached this summer, people will know that Trump not only could just tear it all up again and kick off a new trade war later, but will do. He will keep coming back for more. This will be incredibly damaging for US trade. The tariffs cause primary damage because although, yes, some exporters may absorb some of the costs if their profit margins are enough, Trump is suggesting they absorb all of it. No, they can't afford to do that. Most are paid by the US consumer. So what the average American isn't paying in income tax, they're just paying in import tax instead. Then there's the secondary damage of making individual businesses, but also other governments wary of relying too much on trade with the USA. Canada has the trickiest task here because geography demands that it has to have most of its close trade with its southern neighbour. And yet even Carney has responded to this latest outburst with talk of strengthening trade relationships around the world. Not in the Brexit, I'm going to be discussing this later today actually, the Brexit sense, where we chose to try to increase trade around the rest of the world in order to deal with our self-imposed trade barriers. Carney hasn't imposed these trade barriers on Canada. They are being imposed on him. So he has no choice but to try and strengthen trade around the world. If even Canada is being forced to reduce reliance on US trade with its long-term strategy, when it will find this task way more difficult than literally every other country on earth, then of course every other country on earth is going to be doing the same. And this is where Trump picking fights with everyone all at once also seems strategically questionable. Not only does it mean the maximum hit to the US economy because there are elevated tariffs on all of their imports, but Trump is actually making it easier for other countries to diversify trade away. See, take the recent UK-EU agreements to highlight what I mean. Now, these agreements were very much in line with what Starmer has wanted for years. You could say, well, you know, but this wasn't on the cards a few months ago. They were not seen as a priority for the EU. They were for the UK, not the EU. Until, that is, Trump started his monkey business. All of a sudden, the EU was not only going to lose trade with the USA, and they have their own cost of living crises, but their other trading partners were going to suffer as well. So all of a sudden, the trade outlook for the EU, just like everyone else, not so great. So improving trade with other markets becomes a higher priority. Well, Canada would also like better trade with the EU. So Trump threatening higher tariffs on the EU as well just pushes the two of them together. It makes trade improvements a high priority everywhere. So although what Trump wants is for other countries to prioritise trade talks with the USA, His threats and unreliable behaviour just makes many countries prioritise enhanced trade deals with literally everyone else. Trump's an idiot. I may have mentioned that once or twice in the past. And in about 10 years' time, the world is likely to be a very different beast. And I do not think people will be looking back and go, oh, that Trump was a genius, wasn't he? In fact, the reverse, I think. But let me know what you think in the comments below. For more content, you could subscribe to the channel or even join for access to streams and behind the scenes updates. Thanks for watching, and until next time, I'll see you later.